Hi everyone. Hi everyone. In this video, we will look Databricks Workflows. So Databricks has recently introduced. Workflows has been there for a while, but Databricks has introduced a lot of features within the workflow, so that you don't need to depend on any other additional services like ADF or pipeline, right? And one benefit is Databricks Workflows as a service doesn't cost anything, and you just have to pay for the serverless cluster or the job cluster which you are running, right? Now, as part of this video, I'll just show how we can build a ingestion framework using Databricks Workflows, right? So, in order to let me trigger this job, and I will show the output, then we can see how to build a tool like this. So yeah, so basically we have a workflow, and what we have is we have three tasks there. So this is similar to what we do in ADF. So you have a lookup activity. So the lookup query is nothing but a select statement which basically fetches the metadata from your ingestion, right? So assume you have a common ingestion framework, so you want to copy from source to the target, and you have a use case which needs to be done, right? Which needs to be loaded. So we created a config table. So that config table will have source catalog, target catalog, active flag, and priority, and a use case ID for uniquely identifying the use case, right? Now we need to copy the source table to the target table. So assume the source table can be a normal input table, or it can be a volume, or it can be a SQL server which can be Lakehouse federated into Databricks, right? Now, what we have done is, so this lookup activity will run. So this lookup activity will result, will give you the rows, right? Now this will be basically added to the next activity, which is a for each activity. So as you can see here, in the name of the activity, we see the for each activity. So this for each activity will run the things right in parallel. So you have again an option to configure the parallelism. So if you see here, the concurrency is set to 3. So that's the reason, like, it will start 3 jobs at parallel, right? Then it will one, as and when the queue gets cleared, it will add then few more jobs, right? And you can see a yellow color thing which is added, right, like a warning symbol. So this is again one more cool feature in Databricks, where if you want to ensure that the pipeline is running for a long time, right, and you want to basically stop the pipeline from basically running for a long time, you can set an alert like this, right? And once the pipeline is loaded, so again, so in this, right, if you open a particular notebook, we call a commons notebook, and we get the source and target table. And what we do is we have a common method which will get the data and then load the data, right? I will show the codes of this, right? And once we have loaded the data, the next step is, right, we have a success and failure activity which will update the data into an audit table. So if you see here, right, we have a uh, basically an audit table where the data is loaded. And I mean, once the data is loaded as part of the job run, you can say that, okay, so this job ran today, and this is the total time taken, etc. Now this is the overall flow. Now let us see how to make the setup of this, right? So in order to make this setup, so what I did is I basically created a let me open the code. So I created a Databricks Workflows folder. Inside that, I have ETL. So under ETL, right, like first is your config notebook. So this will create the configuration table, right? So what it has is, initially, right, I created a schema known as workflow meta. Then I created a config table. So this config table will act as a driver So assume you want to load 2000 tables at one go. Just create a config table which has the source schema, source catalog, source table name, target catalog, target schema, target table name, and then that's all, right? And there is an inactive flag. So if you know that a particular table is failing permanently, right? Say, for example, the source table has some data quality issues and you want to stop it from loading, you can use this active flag, change it to inactive, right? And what we have is I just inserted the sample rows. So for this demo, I copied from sample schema to the workspace branch sales schema, right? And you can see the rows like this, right? Select star from, right? You have the use case one, which uniquely identifies for a use case, and you can schedule, trigger the workflow based on this use case ID. And you have the source catalog, target catalog, and then schema details. And there is a priority column and there is an inactive column, right? And then we also have an audit table. So this audit table is after the job runs, we need to ensure, or we need to track the status of the run, right? So you want to know on an average how much time the job is taking, or if you want to know, right, whether the job was succeeded or failed, or what was the reason for failure, maybe you can track those details for further auditing, right? So now how do we build the pipeline, right? So let me go to the workflow. So if we go to Databricks workflow, right? So you have this data loader job. So how to build this job, right? Number one, we need to build a lookup activities kind of similar activity in Databricks workflow. So what we did is, see, we have a SQL type activity and it takes a query. So this can be a SQL query. So only condition is it uses a SQL warehouse, it cannot use a normal cluster, but since we have serverless here, so it just takes the serverless cluster. And this output of this, right, so it is limited to 1000 rows. So whatever output it is coming from here, it will be basically flown to the next step, right? So the next step is a for each activity. So one cool thing is, like, for each activity, right, like basically for each activity will accept only an array, right? But with a SQL lookup activity, you can pass the result row. So this will go and sit as a JSON of array. So if I remove this, you see here it is accepting only uh, an array, right? However, with the lookup activity, similar to how we use it in ADF pipelines, you can pass the input of the previous activity. So the previous activity name is task. So these are, so in Databricks they have a workflow, and within an workflow you have a task, and in a task, right, you can select a task. So if you see here, the type of task is SQL. So here you can change it to say dbt task, or a run, or a Python script task, and you have if else condition, you have a looping with for each loop, right? And you also can run a Power BI dashboard and execute a jar, right? Now let us say we have to create a for each activity. So first step is we need to basically create the I mean add the for each activity. So when you add let me add one more for each activity so that you will be clear on how this is being built, right? So you can use the search bar, you click on add task, click on for each activity, so it will open a for each activity. So now first thing is we need to create the dependency. So you have this depends on, so here you can put the starting task, so it depends on the lookup activity. And then, right, again, for each activity, as you know, it takes an array of inputs and it runs it one by one. So you can set a concurrency. So you can set a concurrency of 3, that means it will run 3 jobs at parallel. And you have this wonderful option, right, run if dependency. So if any of the things failed and if all succeeded, or if the execution just gets completed, you can accordingly redirect the pipeline based on this. Now you can create a name, say test for each activity, and what you can do is you need the input of this, right? So you can directly see by default this inputs requires a JSON. So if you see here, it requires a JSON array. So which is very I mean, it's not difficult. It's like, again, you need to like revert your existing pipeline. Say you have an ADF pipeline where you have a SQL server which holds the metadata, right? Then you can directly use this Lakehouse Federation, and then I have a read-only copy of the source SQL server, and you can use that one. Or you can create a JSON data to pass this, but we are not going to use the JSON approach because it needs a, it's again a tiresome process. Rather than that, you can use this dynamic variable. So if you click on these dynamic variables, you will get all the options for dynamic variable. So what we need to do is we need to get all the rows from the input, right? So we have to click task dot, so this is lookup activity, this is the task name, and we are getting the output dot rows, right? This will get the last statement which is executed in the SQL query, right? And then you can select the column name, so you have the output dot rows. So once you get this rows, so this is the for loop, right? So we have set up the for loop. Now inside the for loop, right, we need to execute the actual task, right? So this is for the iteration. So inside, if you click on this, you can select a notebook, and we have this uh, driving notebook. So this driver notebook will call the commands, and then it will run one after another. So then what you can do is, see, we need to pass the parameters, right? So you got the row one by one, so you have to pass the parameter again. So here you can add a key value pair, and again for you to get the dependencies, you can directly use this dynamic variable, and then you can get the dependencies, right? So that is how you will basically do. And one more thing is, you can basically also set the, you, if you remember at the beginning of the video, I told that there is a warning icon, right? So that warning icon can be set for a particular activity using this. So say for example, if the run duration exceeds more than a particular minute, it will basically have a warning, right? And you can also set the notification so that you will get a mail. I will show a sample of it. So you can click on add notification, you can give your email address, and you can see, you can set the one like email to be sent for various different options, like during the start of the job, during success, failure, warning, that you can add. And also you can skip the skip run. Say for example, you have an option at the workflow level which is known as concurrency. So when you set concurrency to 1, that means at a point in time it can only run one job. So if certain jobs are skipped, right, due to some of the reasons like this, you will get a mail and you can skip those nice, right? Now this is how you will add an activity and you will add a dependency, right? And one key thing on the dependency is basically you have, let me delete this task, right? Because this is anyhow it's not needed. So I just showed you how to add the for each activity. Now if you see here, once you once you added the parameter here, right, as inputs in your actual like notebook, right? So that might need some parameters. For example, this etl driver notebook, right? So this is the notebook which calls the common code. Yeah, this is the notebook which calls the command code and takes two parameters: source table from which it has to read and the target table where it has to write, right? And this commands code is, again, it is a simple code. I just have a couple of functions, right? So one of the function is, if you see here, right, it will just take the input table and write to a output table. It will just add some audit columns like current timestamp and ingested by, etc. And then it writes overwrites a target table, right? And then we basically get the parameters. So now you have to pass the parameters, right? So for passing parameters, since you passed as a input in the previous step, so you have this input dot source table. So from where this dot source table is coming is basically when you run the lookup query, right, you will get the column names here, right? Source table, target table, use case id, right? So this is what you will be using to refer here, right? And you can pass the parameters. That's all done, right? And the next thing, right, which is very critical in any workflow is, like say you want to update or log the things, right? So you we have two tasks here: update audit and update failure audit. So what it does, so if you see here, this again has a notebook. So that basically will call, now let me open. So that again will call this, if you see here, right, this again gets a bunch of parameter: job id, start time, end time, trigger time, use case id, workspace url, all these things it will get, so that it can be logged, right? Now let us see how to get these parameters, right? So we have a bunch of parameters, and then we have a insert audit record function, and that function is pretty much simple. So it just takes all the input parameters and then write to it the audit table which I created in the beginning. So one nice thing with Databricks is, are mostly there is always be a curiosity, right? Like when we have a workflow, we need to know how long it took, right, for the actual execution to run, and how long it is waiting for the pipeline to start, right, or your task to start. So for that, you have this parameters. So these are known as dynamic variable. As we saw for a lookup activity here, so what we need is I need the use case ID, right? Which is for which the job is triggered. So earlier in the for each activity, right, I used basically all the rows. If you see here, I am outputting all the rows, but this is like a limit one. So I just need the first row, right, which will have the use case ID. So I'm just using task.lookup activity. So task.lookup activity is the activity name. Dot output is the output of this, and first row will basically fetch the first row only, right? And you can basically select the column name using the dot notation. This column name is nothing but the column name which comes from the query here, right? So that you can use, and others are all dynamic parameters. So workspace URL, workspace ID, right? And then you need to create the job run, right? The URL of the job. So this is like you can also concatenate your strings. Say for example, here I'm putting jobs slash job ID. So this job ID on the runtime will be changed to the actual job ID, right? I'll show it in the run. Start time will say when this job actually started execution, and trigger time is nothing but it will say the time at which, right, it they say basically trigger time minus start time will give you the time it is spent in waiting for cluster to be run, right? And you have the, I think this is a repeated parameter. You can skip that. And since this is success, we have put success as the status. And how do we know it is success? That depends on here, right? As I said earlier, run if dependencies, right, can have multiple options. So if everything is succeeded, you will have run if all succeeded. And in the other one, it's a clone. So again, one more cool feature is you can clone a task. So if you click on this, right, you can see it will create a copy of this task and you can just update the parameters, right? And this will be pretty much straightforward, right? Let me delete this, right? And yeah, here you go. Now this is all we have, right? And coming to the right side, I think compute everything I have share I have explained, and the task types everything I have explained. And in case if you want to add some dependent libraries, right, this can also be done, right? And parameters you can set. Now this is at the all at task level, you can set the notification and thresholds you can set, right? And this thresholds will be very much helpful, especially if you have a streaming pipeline. More than the run duration, there are a lot on the streaming. So if you have a streaming pipeline, this is a go-to instead of an ADF or base pipeline, right? Now let's say we created the workflow, we did the trial, we want to do a trial run, and you can use the run now button and you can basically trigger, or you can do this run now with different settings, right? So this will allow you to override the parameter. So instead of workspace URL, if you want to give a hard coded value, you can still give it, right? Now what else are available? So you have options like job ID, and you will have creator. So I created this run as is again a good parameter. Let's assume, right, some DevOps tool is basically creating your job, right? However, that DevOps tool cannot have complete access on write access on your data, right? So this run as parameter, what it will do is it will ensure that if you can edit this and then set up so to some other service principal, right, which will have high privileges, right? And you can add a description of the job, and you can also see the lineage, right? So this is one cool thing. So it will give exactly how many tables are read and what are being written from the job, right? And then you have job level parameters. Similar to task level parameters, you can also set as like job level parameters. For example, I can set use case ID as one of the parameters, so that when I trigger this job, right, I can create multiple jobs, right? One with each of the parameters. Like say first use case ID one, right? Then I can have another one job with for a different project with use case ID two, right? Or I can basically create, if you see here, there is one more option, right? In an add task, you can call a job. So if you see here, right, create a where is that run job, right? So with run job, you can basically have a like a child pipeline like this for the whole data loader, and based on the use case, you can have one like master workflow which will call based on the particular parameter. That can also be done. I'll just delete it for now. And you have options to create your cluster, right, and edit your clusters. And then you have tags. So this tags will help you in monitoring. So you can select a value, you can pass the value, say for example you can put environment like use case, right? So use case will be dev. So this will ensure that you can basically, when you can, you want to see the cost in the Databricks system tables, you can check, okay, like a filter for this dev, and you can check, and you can set notifications like similar to task level, you can set at job level also. And another one option is you can also run from a GitHub repository. So instead of deploying the notebooks, you can configure the Git, and with that also you can run, and you can share the job, right? You can edit permission. So it will give you four types of permission, right? So owner is who is owning the job. Can manage will have again full permission. They can do anything with the job, right? Can manage run, they can only view, trigger a new run or delete a run. So this can be given for a support team. Can manage can be given for high privileged users or a group, right? And can view access can be given for probably a less privileged set of support people, right? Like say maybe the level one support people can be given can view access, right? Now, then the final thing is, what if somebody triggers the job multiple times, right, manually, right? And then we need to set up some concurrency, or else you will see multiple pipelines running at the same time and it can collide. So you can use this queue option, and you can set the maximum concurrent runs to one or two, right? And whenever multiple triggers are happening, it will get into queued in the workflow. It will not run unless the first one gets completed, right? Now, the final thing is, okay, we are good with everything. Let us try the retry capability, right? So for the retry capability, I have purposefully, I'm going to fail a task. So let's assume, right, like a source table is not present, right? So to mimic this scenario, I'm just getting a parameter, right? Like I'm just adding a simple if else statement, and I'm adding a simulating a scenario for a failure, right? Now let us trigger the pipeline again, right? Let me click on run now. So this will run the pipeline, and you will see, right? First the SQL activity will run, and then corresponding other activities will run. I think let me fast forward the video and we'll get back to you. Yeah, I think while the job is running, I'll quickly show you, right? So there are multiple views here. So one is a graph view, which will gives a nice thing. And if you see, this is a for each activity, so you see a layers, right? So this will explain that, okay, it's not a single activity, multiple things are running in parallel. And you have a timeline view where you can say, like, if certain things are running in parallel, right, you will be able to see, okay, how long it took for the first thing, and then how long it took for the second thing, like a timeline it will show. Then you have the list view where you can see one by one, right? Since we have put a dependency, right, in the actual pipeline, we have put the dependency, right, depends on this. Since the success and failure are depending on this data loader, unless this is getting completed, it will not allow you to run the other two. So that's why it is showing as a block state, right? Now here, when you go here, right, because of the threshold warning, right, you are getting this symbol. And if you see here, it is running 3 3 in parallel. So if you see the start time, it would have started, see, three things are started in parallel, and the next three is running because we gave a concurrency of three, right? Now the final table, right, which will fail, if you see here, this table should fail. That is because, right, I have purposefully made it as a failure. Yeah, now if you see here, right, this got failed, and after, since it got failed, you will see here this basically the failure audit will run and the success one will not run now, right? And it will basically insert the metadata. Right now you can ask me where are those dynamic values, right? You can see here. So you will see the parameter section, and it will show whether it is a resolved parameter, which means it's a dynamic value which is substituted on the runtime, and it's a actual parameter where we have passed, right? Now, okay, let's assume, right, the job has run now, right? Now we understood that there is a failure and we need to restart the job. So number one, as part of our daily ETL pipeline, right, we will basically uncomment, I mean, either you uncomment this, or you can make the active flag as inactive for this row, and you can run. But for showing the purpose of restartability, I'm just getting back the code. Assume like you have a DevOps pipeline in process, or a DevOps flow, like what is that, DevOps process in place, which will basically you have to raise a PR and then make the bug fix, right? Assume that is being done now. And now what you want to do is come here, you have the option. So now it has failed. So you click on this, you go here or you go to the main job. So if you refresh it, see this has failed. You right click here, you click on repair run. So in repair run, right, again you have option. So if you see here, you can select multiple tasks. In case, right, if you want to run from the beginning, you can select all those tasks. I don't want to run those. So how do I know which are all selected? If you see here, bottom you see repair run 2, that means repair run 3 is there. That means 3 tasks are selected. As I unselect one, you will basically see the count changing, right? Now we have made the code fix. Now let's see if we give a repair run, right, what is happening. So this is a repair run, and when you click on a repair run, it will give you automatically a URL on the top. See, the first activity is skipped, right? So it didn't run again. So the failure happened only on the data loader. So that is alone getting running now. And even if you see in this, right, it will not see all the succeeded jobs are untouched, right? Only the failed job which is failed earlier, now it is getting run, right? And once it gets completed, yeah, I think now it is running successfully. There is no failure, right? And if you want to see the query performance, or if you want to see the, since I'm using serverless, you can see even the like time it took for each of the thing, right? Like how long it took, what was the query it ran. You can do the debugging, right? If you click on this, it will go to your particular command from which it is getting called, and I will get the complete graph, right? And yes, so we have the data successfully written. Now if you go and see there, you will see now the success audit has been done. Now let us go and check the audit table, right? So if we go to our audit table, let me open a new catalog tab. So if you go to audit table, so here you will see all the runs which has been captured, right? Like, so if you see here, uh, taking some time. Yeah. So if you see here, right, the last two runs, right, which is there. So last is a, like, let me sort down by uh, refresh. Let me start it by start time or trigger time. Yeah. So if I, when I started by trigger time descending, you can see the in between run, right, which got failed, and then finally it got succeeded. And then we also have the username details. And what we can do is we can also get the job run URL. So this job run URL can be directly copy pasted, right? And you can basically, this will basically give you the job run. So if you want to monitor this, you can directly go to the job run, right? So the job run will basically give you, like, exactly it will go to the run, right? And one cool thing here is, right, you will clearly clearly know how much time it actually took for the process to run. Say for example, right here, since we are using serverless, it took only 23, I mean, the waiting time was fairly less, right? But in case if you use a normal cluster, you can also see how long it waited, right? So you have this. Now I think pretty much that's all I had. So yeah, the final thing is you have a trigger, right? So once you have this, now we are okay with the run, and we know how to restart from failure, everything is known. So we have to create a trigger, right? So one difference which is seen trigger between ADF and ADB is, in ADF, right, you have a option where you can start the trigger from a particular date, right, till that it will not be active. But in Databricks, right, you have to, I mean, that option is not possible. You have to basically like schedule it directly from current date, right? So if you see here, it's like you can schedule like every day, every minute, hour, or monthly start date, right? I mean, on day one of month, you can schedule those, right? And you can also basically schedule it basically like this, like every 28 days from today, right? Or every 4 weeks. So you can put 4 weeks, and it will run every 4 weeks. So you can click on this, right? And you will get the schedule, and you can pass the schedule, and you can delete the schedule, right? And additionally you have other triggers. So continuous trigger is exclusively for streaming. So if you want a streaming job, right, then ideally streaming will, right, it's like it will run on forever. Whenever it fails, it has to kick up the next set of the streaming job, right? So that you can use the streaming one. And you have a file arrival based one where you can have a volume. It's similar to the old touch file concept, right? So where whenever a job is succeeded, they can put a file in this path, and from that path, right, it can be a location in Azure or AWS or S3, AWS or GCP, or it can be a volume as well, right? And whenever a file is dropped there, it will basically add, and you have options to delay the things, right? Say if already multiple files are being dumped at the same time, you don't want to run everything at one go. So you can have a minimum wait time between triggers, or you can also control the same using concurrency. So I think that's all for this video. I'll explain the things. So in this video, we saw how to create a ingestion framework with a simple ingestion framework which has two tables. One is a lookup table. That lookup table is for basically your config table, which will have the use case name, and then the set of source table, target table, which needs to be copied. And we'll have a lookup activity like similar thing in Databricks, where we call a SQL table and then we get the results. And then we have the for each activity. So in for each activity, you have to pass a JSON, or in case if you are not passing a JSON, you can also use the task.activity, how similar to ADF output.activity, right? It's similar to that. We can use this task.lookup activity, and we can get the last run or any of the task here and get the output rows. Once you get the output rows, you will have to use the corresponding notebook. So this notebook you will basically use, and you will get the input table, output table details. And once you, I mean, basically you will, from the output rows, you might need to pass the parameters. So here we have parameterized source table and the target table. So those source and target table, we are like using the dot notation, we are selecting that. So this is nothing but it comes from your lookup query. So in lookup query, we have source and target table. So first up, we run this lookup query. This is all the data set. This will be passed. And then when you do the dot notation, it will select that column name, right? And then it runs the things. And finally you have two options, like like if based on success and failure, you can redirect it. And here you also have seen how we can get very useful dynamic parameters like workspace URL or your job run ID, job ID, and then start time, end time. All these details can be got can be taken. And finally you also see what are the various options, like in terms of concurrency, and then you have the warnings, and how you can ensure that, right, like the permissions you can manage, and the run as option, which will be used for basically a high privilege service principal will run the workflow, whereas the creator can be a less privileged DevOps service principal, which can be used to deploy this, right? And you have seen the triggering options. And yeah, pretty much that's it. So we can successfully port a ADF like pipeline and then have a similar setup in Databricks. Just in case if you're using SQL Server or something, just redirect it as a, I mean, attach as a Lakos Federation, and then as a foreign catalog, you can query and do the same activity, right? That's all I have for this video. Please do like, share, and subscribe.